Horen ze mij?
Nee.
Ja? Alright.
Hallo, hallo.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Hello, I hope everyone can hear me. And a warm welcome to all of you. So I'm happy to kick off this edition of the Dufas College Tour. We have a wonderful guest today on stage, and we are with a lot of wonderful people, so that's great.
We will be co-hosting the event today. We are Jelle Zegers and Nikita Frolov. He was the former chairman of Duitenberg, and I'm the current external affairs of Duitenberg. This event is hosted by Dufas. They are the Dutch Fund and Asset Management Association, together with Studium Generale from the University of Twente and Duitenberg, the Investment Association.
Yeah.
And assetmanagementcareers.nl, that's a site related to Dufas, together with Dufas.nl.
So today it's time to talk about something really interesting. We're going to discover for the next 90 minutes the world of asset management, what it is, why it's important, how it could change the world, and of course whether it's a career for you in this sector. Those are the topics that we will discuss today, and most important, what does it mean to work in the asset management sector?
Now it's time to introduce our main guest, and I'm proud they're willing to travel all the way from the west to Enschede to be with us today. Our guest is a well-known member of Duitenberg, and he has been with the association for many years. He's also the CEO of VanEck Europe, a company with over 118 billion in assets under management. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Martijn Rozemuller.
Hi. Well, Martijn, welcome. Take a seat.
Thank you very much.
So, can you click?
Oh.
All right. So this is going to be the first topic of tonight. So Martijn, welcome, and nice that you could join us today.
Yeah,
So-
thank you very much. It's
Yeah.
nice to be back in Enschede.
So in the front row we have a lot of people from Duitenberg sitting. They probably already know you, but for the people who don't know you, can you introduce yourself?
Of course. So yeah, I was born and raised in Twente. So I'm original Tukker, and I grew up in Nijverdal, small city here in Twente. And I went to Twente University many years ago. I graduated in 1995, and after graduation, or actually just before it, I was thinking about where do I want to work, and someone gave me really good advice, and that was to do a couple of practice rounds, interviewing for jobs. So I went to at the time very small trading company, options trading company, and I sort of tried to practice. Long story short, I ended up taking that job that they offered me, and that's how I got into where I am today.
Okay, and besides your career, what do you like to do when you're not working?
Ooh, well, that's a good question. There are a couple of things I tend to do. I have a rather big family. I have 7 children. So that means that when I'm not working, there's always something to do. Definitely at the first stages of my career, there were more people to manage at home than in the office. But if I'm not doing that, I really like to cycle. Not only commuting from work to home. I live in Amsterdam, I work in Amsterdam. People in Amsterdam cycle, probably pretty much like people in Twente. And then if I'm not cycling to work, I am cycling leisurely. There's a lot of nice routes you can take. And if I'm not in Amsterdam, but I'm in Friesland, where my holiday home is, then I cycle there. So I try to keep busy both here and physically.
So a lot of cycling.
It's a lot of cycling, yeah.
So of course today we're going to talk about asset management, but for maybe the people who don't know, could you maybe explain what is asset management?
Yeah, sure. So basically the word itself obviously is very self-explanatory. So we manage assets, but there's obviously a broad range of assets to be managed, and there are several ways to do it. So basically the asset management industry consists of, various different types of companies like asset managers, but also insurance companies that manage assets, banks, family offices, independent wealth managers. So I come from the part of the asset management industry that manages assets in products that people can buy on exchange. So yeah, basically our job is to make sure that we look after the best interest of clients, because in the end, the assets we manage, and well, you mentioned a large number, 118, or
118,
I think it's even 120 at the moment, but the $120 billion that we manage, by the way, is for VanEck Global. I'm just responsible for the European part, which at the moment is 15 billion. But that's obviously money that belongs to our clients, so we have to take care of it and manage it the best way possible. And we do that by simply buying equity, buying bonds, buying listed real estate, even crypto these days, although today was not the best day for crypto. I could tell some of you are actually invested in crypto. Well, don't worry, there's drinks afterwards, it'll all be better. So yeah, there's different ways to do it, but I hope my extended answer gives a bit of an impression.
Okay. And I'm guessing you were not born as an asset manager, right?
No, I don't think anyone is actually, although there's obviously assets in real life that you also manage, but no, I think it's in my case, it's definitely something I stumbled upon, literally. When I came to the campus, where we are today, in 1989, you can guess my age afterwards. On the first day of the intro week, I think it was actually not too far from here, on like a lawn, and there were some people with the mandatory krat goals. Well, it turned out they were from Duitenberg. And that's how I ended up becoming a member of Duitenberg, and also how I ended up becoming interested in investing and everything that, well, comes along with it.
Oh, that's nice to hear that Duitenberg also had some part of it.
Well, actually, it was a very decisive moment in my career, at least in hindsight.
So, well, let's say that I'm a student and I'm investing with my own money and I'm taking it very, very seriously. So would you then say the knowledge of a retail investor is useful if you want to pursue a career in asset management, and if so, how?
I think it's very useful, and the main reason is, if you are pursuing a career in asset management, all the experiences you have now as a retail investor will help you to understand the needs of your client. Because when you're at the other side of the table, it's basically you, current day you, that you're dealing with. So it's very important to learn what it is like to invest as a retail investor, because it will give you valuable insights in the needs of your future clients.
One last question before we move to the audience. What kind of people are you looking for in the asset management sector? I think the students here are interested in what it takes to apply for a job in asset management.
Well, I think when we talk about asset management, and I hope I'm not disappointing too many of you now, but a lot of people think about Wall Street. Maybe you've seen The Wolf of Wall Street. Let's raise hands. Who saw that movie? It's nothing like that at all. In fact, Wolf of Wall Street is more about boiler rooms and ripping people off. And that's not what the asset management industry is about, although we don't have the best reputation. And in all fairness, that's one of the reasons that we do events like this, to make people understand what we actually do. I was an options trader before going into the asset management industry, and when I traded options, or as they call it these days, high frequency trading, with Optiver, I also wasn't very aware of the asset management industry. But then in 2008, when I founded Think ETFs, that later was acquired by VanEck, I started to realize that the asset management industry has a really bad reputation. And in a sense, it's understandable. There have been many bad products sold to clients. I am happy to see there is a very diverse crowd today, and it's not just students, or perhaps students just got really old, but there's also older people today, and they will probably realize or remember the, especially in the Netherlands, legio lease affaires, aandelen lease affaires. There were many bad products sold. And to me, that was one of the reasons to start my business, because I thought, well, we can do much better than that. But it was also the realization on, well, the bad reputation of the asset management industry. And I think now we're almost 16, 17 years after 2008 when I started the company, and 2008 obviously was the year where everybody became aware of how terrible these products were that were sold starting end of 90s. And I think the bad reputation is actually no longer justified. I think we do a lot of good things these days. I think transparency has increased massively. Regulation has improved a lot. So yeah, I think we deserve a second chance as an industry. And I hope by doing this tonight, but also we've obviously done more of these across the Netherlands, it will help to to improve the image, but also to attract new talent to that industry. And what we hope to attract is people that want to make a difference, that don't just see the Wall Street or the Wolf of Wall Street before them and just want to make a lot of money, but know people that actually want to make a lot of money for their clients. And obviously, as a firm, we also want to make money, but VanEck, and I should have probably mentioned this earlier, but it's a family firm. And I think family-owned businesses usually have two things in common. And actually, I come from a family-owned business. There are maybe some people in the audience that know that, because it's a Twente business. And it's your name, your family name is sort of your reputation, and you don't want to spoil that. And even though VanEck, it's a Dutch name, and yes, they are Dutch, but 2 generations ago, they really value their reputation and their name. So for us, it's really important that we make sure we do the right thing. And we're looking for people that have that same sentiment and want to make a positive change in finance.
Well, I hope there are some students here who are convinced now to begin a career in asset management. So now we will switch over to some questions from the audience. So please raise your hand if you have a question, and otherwise we will have some questions as well to follow up.
How does VanEck differentiate from the competitors in Europe and America and Asia?
Well, the good thing is, so let me talk just about Europe, because that's complicated enough, and it's also the part of the business I'm responsible for. I think there's a couple of ways we separate ourselves from the competitors. The first I mentioned, we're a family business. That means that we're not as corporate. We are not looking at the next quarter or the next quarterly P&L. We're looking at the long-term picture. And that makes a difference, because it means that we're not trying to get as much money from a client, or we're trying to keep the client with us as long as possible. That also goes for the way we look at our team, our employees. We basically hire someone in the hope that they will retire with us. We need to take good care of them, offer them a lot of opportunities, a lot of challenges, and so far so good. And then when you look at our product range, the thing that sets us apart is that we do things differently. And that's obviously a very broad statement, so I will elaborate on that a little bit. And I think the best way to shortly explain it is one of the first interviews I did together with Jan VanEck, our global CEO, when he came to the Netherlands in 2018. It was an interview with FD, het Financieel Dagblad, and the journalist asked basically to describe why we were different or how we were different. And our description was basically, well, you have Heineken or Gols, or you have all of these crafted beers. And we're the crafted beers. We're different, but for a good reason. It tastes better. And if you look at the products, obviously you can't taste the financial product, but if you look at the exposure we offer, it's usually different for a good reason. For instance, our global equity product doesn't track the MSCI World, because we think MSCI World is a great way to determine the state of the global economy, but it's not necessarily a good way to invest, because if you do, the biggest 10 or 15 names are already 20% of the index. So you think you're diversified over almost 2,000 companies, but in fact, 20% of your money is in 10, or maybe 7, the Magnificent 7. So what we like to do is use an equal weight strategy. And sort of the reasoning behind it, and I'll try to be brief, but because I already see drinks being postponed, and I don't want to do that, but the reason we do it is, if you think about the big debate between active and passive management, Active has always been about trying to beat the market, trying to be the smartest kid in the room, trying to buy only the companies that will go up. And academic research has shown over and over again that that's pretty much impossible because of the simple reason that you cannot have all the information. And even if you did, it's hard to interpret it the right way. And even if you're able to do that, then there's emotions in the market that will still kill you in the end. So the only way out of it is diversification. And if you believe that, then it's funny that you believe in market cap weight indices because they have a strong preference for bigger companies. And why would a bigger company do better than a smaller one? There's no rationale behind it. So that's one of the things that we do differently. The other thing is thematic investing. We really believe that you can diversify yourself by adding certain themes. And then if you want to play that theme, and that could be semiconductors, it could be space, it could be defense. If you want to play the theme, you don't want to end up with the same companies you already have in your big global equity ETF. So we believe in pure play. If we have a theme, we try to find companies, or I should rephrase, we try to find an index that finds companies that have at least 50% of the revenue from the theme. So yeah, we're pretty different from most of the firms because most of the firms, they go after the S&P 500, the MSCI World, the Eurostoxx 50. They do basically the same stuff, but try to do it a little bit cheaper. We try to do something different that adds value.
Well, Martijn, thank you for your answer. You introduced our next topic pretty well. Later on, we're also going to talk about some moral dilemmas, also about themes, for example, like defense. So for now, we will move on to the next part of tonight, which is investing and its strong link with society. So Nikita is going to introduce it for us.
Yeah, so the Netherlands is unique in the world with the collective pension system. Each and every month of the year, millions of Dutch people automatically put money aside for their future wealth. It does not matter if they have a low or high salary, or whether they are wealthy or poor. The system includes almost all citizens and contains a total of around 1,500 billion euro, or 1.5 trillion euro. A huge amount.
I'm actually not that big.
I'm sorry. So Martijn, what the hell happens with all this money?
That's a good question. Well, I only know what happens to part of it, but no, I think in the end, the system we have in Holland is pretty good. It's one of the best pension systems, I think, globally. The only downside maybe is the fact that it's also very mandatory. And if you are in a certain profession, yeah, there's not a lot of options. You have to either be in it or not, or actually not is also not an option. You have to be in it. So the money is put to work, basically, in a number of ways. Most of it is put to work through listed equity or listed bonds. So it's money lent by governments or companies. It's, well, obviously equity issued by companies. Some of it also goes to private equity or infrastructure. And the big idea behind it, obviously, is that if we were to save at a bank for our pension, well, the yield, the performance would be far too low. And therefore, you need to put the money to work. And that's not only good for the people that want to have a nice pension, it's also good for our economy in the Netherlands, but also in Europe, because there's a lot of companies, but also governments, that put that money to good use. To maybe, well, governments, for instance, that they can do education, create a smarter workforce. They can do infrastructure. There's companies that develop new innovative ways that people can improve their living. So in the end, it's a win-win. So yeah, that's what happens with the 1.5 trillion in the Netherlands.
Wow, that's a crazy amount.
It
So
certainly is a crazy amount.
Definitely. So you mentioned that like the pension funds, of course, invested money. You with VanEck, you offer a lot of ETFs, which allow investors to diversify, something you already mentioned a couple minutes earlier. Yeah, you can invest in teams like crypto, video game, esports, and defense, for example. But first of all, for the people who might not know what I'm talking about, what exactly is an ETF?
It's a good question. And I like to do another sort of poll. if you don't mind. So if you know what an ETF is, please raise your hand. And I'm still going to explain afterwards. So, all right, so that's roughly 40% of the room would be my estimate. It's a lot better than when I started in 2008, because then a lot less hands would raise. But it also shows there's some work to be done. ETFs, I always start to say the first thing, and that's the name is really awful. Because it's like an abbreviation with 3 letters, and no one really has an intuitive feeling what it stands for, which I completely understand. And the funny thing is, Euronext, the Dutch exchange in Amsterdam, when ETFs became listed there, they actually had a much better name.
Can I interrupt you for
Sure.
a second? What does ETF stand for?
I will explain in a second.
Oh,
I like the youthful enthusiasm here.
definitely.
No, so Euronext had a better name, and it was called index trackers. And an index tracker, for all of you who understand English, immediately makes sense. It tracks an index. And that's also what an ETF does, but it stands for Exchange Traded Fund. An Exchange Traded Fund, I think, still explains less than index tracker, but Exchange Traded Fund means basically it's a fund, like a mutual fund, een beleggingsfonds, which is listed on the exchange, and you can buy and sell during the day. Because one of the big disadvantages of, let's say, normal beleggingsfondsen is that you cannot trade them intraday, but you can only put in a buy or sell order today, and if you had done that before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then tomorrow it would be executed. ETFs are like normal equity, like normal shares. You can trade them during the day, you can give a limit, so you can say, I don't want to pay more than this, or I don't want to receive less than this, which is a big advantage, because with the mutual fund, or beleggingsfonds, as we call them in the Netherlands, that's not possible.
Okay, well, that's pretty interesting. So, as an asset management manager, getting returns for your clients is of course very important.
Yeah.
However, when you invest such large amounts, it can have like a huge impact on society as a whole. So, our question to you is, how do asset managers balance getting returns while also contributing to society?
Well, that's, especially since Trump was elected, a very interesting question. Because we've seen, until end of last year, a lot of progress being made when it came to sustainable investing. And I think the Netherlands, but also the Nordic countries, really initiated it 15 years ago, probably, maybe even 20. And yeah, for some reason, that now has been, well, sort of changed a little bit. But let's ignore Trump for a moment. I know we can't do it for long. Let's ignore him for a moment.
There's more coming.
That there are still some asset managers in Europe that feel there is value in sustainable investing, in not just thinking about the return in monetary terms, but also think about sort of the broader meaning to society. And then you take into account environmental stuff, corporate governance, the way people are treated, human rights. So there's many ways to deliver return to our end clients. Because let's face it, if we talk about pension money, yes, people obviously want to have enough to retire comfortably. But if at that time the environment is a mess, or there's war everywhere, or societal unrest, then your retirement also isn't very pleasant. So there's a lot of things at stake, and I think it's important that we keep all of those in mind and not just focus on maximum returns in monetary, in a monetary definition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Going back to the pension funds, in the Netherlands, most people don't have a choice in how their pension money is invested. So do you think there should be more individual control for where their pension savings go?
I actually do. Yeah, I think there's obviously been a lot of talk about changing the pension system in the Netherlands. And I think for a good reason. Because even though having a collective pension industry has a lot of benefits, there's also some negative sides to it. And one of the things is that you can't really have any influence over how your pension fund invests for you. And it goes both ways. There's been a lot of talk lately in the media on how, for instance, ABP, our biggest pension fund, deals with not investing in some of the Magnificent Seven because, well, they have certain issues with it. And I think it's a very interesting debate, and it also shows that it's polarizing a little bit the society because, yeah, some people have a very strong opinion, but if they are, with their pension in ABP, then they simply have to basically swallow whatever is decided for them. There are ways to do it differently. The US has the individual pension scheme where people can basically create their own pension. And if you look at it from a cost perspective, usually the idea is obviously that if you do something collectively, you can do it cheaper. Well, the question is whether the US actually is more expensive. I don't think so. So it's a good debate to have. I don't have the answer. I don't think there is a black and white answer to which is best, because you can't please everyone. And in the end, you have to decide which is sort of the suboptimal situation.
Well, thank you for your answer. Well, so now we've done the introductory questions about investing in society.
This man over here has a question.
So now we switch to some questions from the audience. So don't worry, Peter's gonna come to you. You can also shout if you want.
Hello, how loud is this? All right.
It's perfect.
Yeah. As someone who's not really knowledgeable about assets and trading and growing the money, using the money, I wanted to ask, you mentioned that the retirement plans include sustainability, because if there's a climate crisis or civil unrest or wars, then the retirement also is not so effective. But how is this motivated for the people that are handling assets? Because if I imagine people handling larger assets, I do imagine older people, and in the short-term thinking, maximizing the asset values would be a lot more beneficial, because then maybe that person is going to die in 20 years and they don't really have to care about any of this. Or if they have the assets valuing a lot more, they can afford to, let's say there's water shortage, buy water or buy land or exclude different demographics. How is this motivated? Thank you.
Well, it's a good question, and actually it sort of relates to my statement earlier. Having a collective pension scheme means that you try to look after both the older people that are close to their pension and the younger people that are still far from it. And you're absolutely right. If you look at the sustainable impact for the younger people, that's much more important than the performance of the money. So that's why it's important that the people managing these assets are trying to find the balance between the requirements for, well, the different parts of the group that they are trying to cater for. And it's definitely not an easy solution. But I do think even for, let's say, the older people that are closer to the pension, obviously lifespan expectancy has increased over the last decades. So even if you are now close to your pension, let's say you're 60, chances are that you may live to be 80 or 90. So you probably still have that long-term perspective. And I think a lot of people in the asset management industry also feel the responsibility even for the next generation. So I think that's a good thing. And yes, there are also still people that suffer from short-termism. And yeah, those are the people that we try to, teach, mitigate. And yeah, so and I also think that's a good reason, as I mentioned earlier, why we need to have younger, motivated people in the asset management industry, because they can, well, basically make the case for their age group.
Well, so are there any other questions from the room? Yeah, there, Peter, all the other way.
You were telling about ETFs and comparing them quickly to mutual funds, beleggingsfondsen. And that mainly the benefits of them. What is one of the negative sides of using ETFs compared to mutual funds?
Well, that's a question I have had many times. So I had a lot of time to think about it. And I haven't really been able to come up with a good answer. And it's not because I don't want to say anything bad about ETFs, but there's really not a lot of downside, especially not compared to mutual funds. The only partly true answer is, with an ETF, you don't have the chance to outperform the market, which is, could be considered a downside. But then again, academic research has shown that, especially after 10 years or longer, mutual funds never outperform. So, is that a negative? I don't know.
So sometimes with ETFs, it can also be that you don't have the choice because, for example, you make the product that you have a whole list of companies that you buy into. How does you know that those companies are all good? Can there also be some bad companies in the ETF, or how does that work?
By definition, the larger the ETF, the more bad companies will be in there too. But let me give you a small example on when I was a lot younger and thought that I was also a lot smarter, and turned out not to be so smart. In 2003, there were some issues with a company most of you know. Whoever goes grocery shopping at Albert Heijn? A lot of people, right? There's no Albert Heijn on the campus, right?
No.
Okay. Anyway, you have to go to the city then. But okay, so most of you know Albert Heijn. You probably also know Ahold, the listed company. When I was trading on the options exchange in Amsterdam, one of the companies or one of the options that I was responsible for was Ahold. And I also had some of my personal money invested in Ahold because I thought I knew everything about Ahold. And well, it turned out in 2003, something happened that I had no idea about, but also none of my colleagues knew about. And also, I was still a trader then, but also a lot of the fund managers in the asset management industry had no idea about. Ahold turned out to be caught in a bookkeeping scandal in the US. I don't remember the exact amount, but let's say the shares went down 60%, 6-0. So my money in Ahold also went down 60%. And I still thought I knew everything about Ahold. To me, that was probably the start of my fondness of index investing or passive investing. And it showed me that you can do all the research you want. You can try to gain all the data that's available about a company. But if that company has something to hide, they will probably be able to hide it for you for a long time. And when it finally comes out, it's too late to do anything about it. So to me, that was a big eye-opener. And I really believe trying to be the smartest kid in the room, trying to only have the companies that will do best, I think it's simply not possible.
Okay. So
Thank you. I had a question. Right now we're talking about sustainability and performance in a way, in a balance between the two, like choosing. But what do you think is the effect of sustainability long term for performance? Is it positive, negative, maybe neutral?
Well, this is also a question that I've had many times. And there were times where I could easily answer it because we had two global equity products. One of them we started in 2011, the other one we started in 2013. Spoiler alert, we merged them a couple of years ago. But before the merge, we had a nice way to see what would happen. And for many years, at least 5 or 6 years, it was really 1 year the one did better, the other year the other. So there wasn't really a big difference between performance of a sustainable ETF and a very similar, well, non-sustainable or non-screened ETF. And at that time, a lot of people were very happy to make the choice for sustainable investing because, well, if the performance is more or less the same, sustainable investing probably gives you a better feeling, right? And then, especially over the last 3 years, that sort of changed. And a lot of these more sustainable companies actually performed a little bit worse And I think that, combined with the person that I wasn't going to mention anymore this evening, made a big difference. And it shifted appetite. And this is also one of the things that I referred to earlier, where ABP and also some of the other pension funds had a bit of issues where people started to say, listen, well, you make all these sustainable choices, but yeah, it's really costing us revenue. It's costing performance. So, yeah, especially over the last 3 years, sustainable investing hasn't done great. Does it mean it will never be great again? I don't think so. I think in the end, it may actually be better because companies that have a good policy on sustainability usually have a better risk management. They are more aware of risks. They tend to have less lawsuits against them. So therefore, they'll probably do better in the end. And the other reason is, I am one of those eternal optimists. I think in the end, people want to do the right thing. So I also believe whether we as asset managers force companies to, in the end, people, and I'm especially rooting for the new generation here present today, will try to improve the way companies deal with, well, sustainable issues in the next decades. So in the end, I don't think sustainability will be an issue in 20 or 30 years from now. I think by then it will be common good. And since investing is for the long term, yeah, I think in the end it'll probably not make a big difference. But for the next 3 to 5 years, well, it could be that there is a difference in performance. But I wouldn't worry about it too much.
I can agree with that. Thank you.
So I thought there was one very burning question from one of our beloved members here in the front, Mr. Russi. So you can ask your question. That's the last question before we move on to the next part.
Yeah, so thank you for accepting my question.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You can talk later.
Yeah, no worries. But I see a lot of very big numbers, like 1.5 trillion. You said something like 120 billion, also like 15 billion in Europe. So those are like some pretty big numbers, even bigger than, for example, how do you call it? Yeah, the assets of certain countries in Europe. So my question is, in a certain sense, how do you manage these very big numbers of money, especially in the face of, for example, potentially bad political decision or bad monetary policy? So how do you protect yourself against that? That's my question.
Well, so it's an interesting question, especially since the last part. So to protect yourself against bad monetary policies or against, let's say, bad political decisions, that is obviously very difficult. And I think maybe even impossible. And it doesn't just affect the asset management industry, it affects all of us. There has been, obviously, especially in the past, many protected products where, I don't know, does Duitenberg still have an options committee?
No, not yet anymore.
Too bad. I used to be a member of it, so maybe we did something bad and it doesn't, well.
Yeah, that's what happened.
So there is certain instruments that you can use to protect downside risk, put options. And I think probably in the short term, if you have good reason to use them, it's fine. But in the longer term, I sometimes make the comparison to if you have an asset that is very valuable and you don't have the means to replace it once it's gone, you should insure it. So like your house. I guess most of you who have if you have a house, you probably have it insured because if it burns down, you don't have the money to build it up and it's not going to repair itself. Now, if you look at the asset market, that can also be very valuable and it can also burn down partly, but it has an interesting characteristic. It usually rebuilds itself. So I don't think we should be insuring ourselves against a downturn in the asset market. There's one way to do it, but it costs you a lot of money. And I think there's a better way to do it, and that is have a long-term perspective on things. And that's for free. So if you are worried that there may be some bad decisions coming in the next 3 to 5 years, my advice would be don't invest or maybe take your money out of the market and go back when you feel more comfortable. I wouldn't sort of insure my position with put options and just waste money on that. And to be honest, if you are worried, usually that's a good time to invest, because there's a saying that bull markets climb a wall of worry, and that's usually true. And I'm not giving any advice here, don't worry. I don't know if there's any regulatory people in the room, but no, it's not advice, but it's a fact of life. And I always tell people, if you are worried about your investments in a market that goes down, zoom out, take the helicopter view, try to look at least a couple of decades of market movement, and you'll probably feel better. And also, that's not a guarantee that everything will be good in the end, but, well, it's worked in the last 100 years.
Well, I think you've enlightened the audience with some great not investment advice.
Thank you very much.
So now we will move on to the next part of this session, and it's about some moral dilemmas. And you mentioned that you would not want to mention one guy, so we are going to mention him for you. So, money talks. With assets under management at asset managers, you can be of influence. NGOs are also targeting asset managers and pension funds to use this influence. This means that investing money for the long term also comes with moral dilemmas. Think of investing in weapons, fossil fuels, or indirectly supporting political regimes. So I'm going to give you some dilemmas, and I want to give you a brief answer on what you think about it.
I will get some liquid courage from Coles,
Yes.
and then we'll go right into it.
First dilemma. With recent developments in the United States, there is an increased tension in investing for society. The Trump administration is trying to take 20 billion away from climate and clean energy projects. How do you think the US will influence the world of asset management regarding investing in a better world?
I think they will have a negative impact in the short term. If you look at the outcome of elections over the last decades in the US, then there is some light at the end of the tunnel, because usually after a Republican candidate, the next one is a Democrat. So yeah, we may only have to deal with this for 4 years, and then things may change. But yeah, it's definitely bad in the short term. The good thing is that there's also some European asset managers that may be less afflicted by what Trump dictates. But in all honesty, a lot of a lot of European firms also have to deal with US clients. So yeah, it's definitely not a good situation at the moment. But again, in the long term, it may be just noise.
Have you noticed any differences in your company since Trump came
No.
to power? No?
No, I did notice that some of my clients think differently. But for us as a company, it's not made a big difference. We've never been dark green. We've always liked to offer sustainable options where we think we can. But for instance, one of our latest products, the defense ETF, yeah, that's very difficult to do it according to sustainability criteria, because investing in defense, at least for, let's say, 2 years ago, it wasn't considered to be very ESG minded. I think you can actually debate that, because without the defense industry, well, some of the social dilemmas will also backfire on us. But yeah, so I don't see a lot of change. But who knows, maybe there will be some more change in the next 2 or 3 years. But then hopefully after that, we'll get a more sensible president in the US.
Okay.
Yeah. So coming to the defense ETF, the defense industry is a huge global industry with billions invested every year. How do asset managers make sure this money doesn't end up in the wrong hands?
That's a really good question. Because when we started to design this product, there was still a lot of debate in society whether you should invest in the defense industry at all. We did some research and noticed that at that time already, and this is 2.5 years ago, the public opinion was already starting to move in the other direction, because people started to realize without the defense industry, yeah, well, there's no stopping Putin, and yeah, we do want to lend a hand to the Ukraine. So it became a little bit more palatable. There were a couple of things that we also considered. One was controversial weapons. So in an ideal world, we would have only invested in companies that do defense, not offense. Because, well, defense you can justify, you want to be able to defend yourself. Attacking someone else, well, that's maybe a little bit harder to justify. The hard part is obviously that there's not a lot of companies that only do defensive military systems. So the one thing you can do is take out controversial weapons. So there is a lot of criteria or guidance on what are controversial weapons, and then you have to think in terms of anti-personnel landmines, white phosphorus, depleted uranium, cluster ammunition. So there's a lot of really bad stuff, and we can screen on that. So we make sure that those companies are excluded from the index that we use to track. But that's about all we can do. And in the end, this is a product that still doesn't resonate with everyone, which is fine. But at least we found a way, I think, to make it, sort of a best compromise situation.
Yeah. But were there like strict regulations for making these ETFs, or?
Not really. There's the controversial weapons rule, and that's something most asset managers have to obey in Europe. So it made sense that we also use that one. Although for index products, there's an exception to that rule. But we decided to comply with the rule anyway. But there's not a lot of other rules. And it's mainly a moral decision in the end.
Okay, well, interesting answer. So, some countries and industry still rely heavily on fossil fuels for economic stability and jobs. If asset managers completely stop investing in these industries, it could be devastating for that country, which gives a dilemma about providing jobs and economic stability or being good for society. How do you think asset managers should tackle this?
Well, it's a great question. Reminds me of, I think it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, around one of these global soccer championships, where there were some questions in the media on a certain company that, I don't know, if were football shirts or maybe even the football balls, that they were made in a poor country in Africa. And there were also some children working in that industry. And obviously a lot of people were against it. But when a journalist dove deeper into it, they found that, well, the company also made sure that these kids got education, and it was actually helping the community. And so there's always two sides to this story. And I think there's no easy answer. I think there is a balance you have to keep in mind. But there is, I think it's a commercial for electric company that's still running in the Netherlands right now. And it basically says we are still addicted to fossil fuels and there's no easy solution. And I think that's absolutely true. We can't get rid of them even if we wanted to. So I think the best way to deal with it is at least stay partly invested, because as an investor you get a vote and you can at least, well, cast your vote or maybe even give suggestions and think along. And I think even most of these companies in the fossil fuel industry are already convinced that whether it's 10, 20 or 30 years, but the whole system will end. And you can already see there's a lot of investments in solar, wind, hydrogen, nuclear. And by the way, this is not a commercial, but we have ETFs in most of those. And it's helping. It helps if you have a couple of alternatives. But one of the worst performing ETFs in the last 4 years was the hydrogen ETF, because even though it still holds a big promise, there's a lot of uncertainty on how this will play out. Governments are not willing to give long-term commitment, which means that companies are not willing to really invest long-term committed. So I think it's not just the asset management industry that has a role to play here. I think also governments globally should be more clear on how they will support alternatives for the fossil fuel industry. And as long as we don't have enough commitment, it's hard to make those investments. And it's not just in the energy sector. I was invited about half a year ago to the Dutch Tweede Kamer to discuss investing in defense. And so one of the big issues there was companies that can, let's say, produce ammunition or equipment for the Ukraine. They have to invest in production lines to be able to do so. But they will not make that investment unless they have some guarantees from the government that they will actually allow it and or fund it. So in the end, it should be sort of a joint venture between politicians, government, and asset owners or asset management industry. And yeah, if that mix is good enough, then it will work.
Yeah. And so next to the defense industry, what are all other dilemmas impacting your decisions, and how do you deal with that?
Well, I think the most important dilemmas were mentioned.
Okay.
That's the whole sustainable side of things. That's how you balance performance, sustainability. I think the one dilemma that we haven't touched yet is like also a moral one or an ethical one. And I'm going to do another poll. So, how many people actually have investments?
Okay.
I'm happy to see that. That's above average. How many people play in lotteries or casinos? Be honest. Well, statistics would assume some of you are lying. Anyway, over the whole Dutch population, it's actually the other way around. There's much more people playing in lotteries or casinos than are investing. And probably the reason for it is that if you look at the commercials that casinos or lotteries can make, they can promise you literally golden mountains, right? They can tell you that, well, you're stupid if you're not playing because next month you'll make this big prize. Now, if I do a commercial for my company, I have to be very modest. I have to tell you, you can lose all your money. Yeah. Which isn't even true, but I have to say it. So this is a dilemma that I've been struggling with for a long time. Because it's almost like unfair competition. Like the companies that do these lotteries or betting, they can make very nice advertisements and they can really deceive all of you into thinking that you'll probably be the next winner. Whereas the asset management industry has to be very careful not to promise too much. So yeah, maybe you can make 6 or 7% annually, but it's not guaranteed and you may lose all your money. Or you can win $1 million. It's not a fair system, right? So yeah, that's a dilemma as well.
Thank you. So now we, for the third part, move over to some questions from the audience. Yeah, let's start here in the front. First,
One of the old sayings about money is that how do you make a small fortune? You start with a large one.
Yep.
So this industry is also ruled by high levels you need to climb before you can enter. How would you, for example, if you would create your company, do you think ETF again?
Mm-hmm.
Or would give advice to entrepreneurs to create new products? What would be your advice to them?
Be humble and be patient. Be aware that it will take 2 or 4 times as long and be also 2 or 4 times as costly. That's for entrepreneurs. But the way you started, yes, it's far easier to quickly lose a lot of money in the stock market than it is to quickly gain a lot of money. Or to put it differently, it's really hard to become rich investing. It's quite easy to become poor investing if you make the wrong decisions. So yeah, you have to be, your expectations have to be managed well. And I think that's one of the things that we've done well over the last almost 20 years now. We've always managed people's expectations, and not just by saying you can lose all your money, but by making it realistic and saying, listen, in the long run, investing can yield 6, 7, 8% per year, but it will be a rocky ride, and there's no smooth line from, well, the left bottom to the right upper corner. And if you manage expectations well, usually your clients are better prepared and they stay with you longer. So that's one. But that's more for the investors. For the entrepreneurs, or the aspiring entrepreneurs, which I assume are plenty available here this evening, yeah, it's really about persisting, stamina, just being willing to suffer for a long time. I started my company in 2008, and especially in hindsight, it was not a great year to start a company because it was the financial crisis. And well, I was too busy starting my company. I didn't really notice, but I found out afterwards. So yeah, there were definitely weeks, months, or even years that I thought, why the hell did I start my own company? Because it's freaking hard. But yeah, if you just find a way to just carry on, and if you really truly believe what you're doing makes sense and adds value, I think that's probably the best way to describe it. You have to be convinced that the product or service that you're delivering actually adds value to the people that make use of it, because that's the only reason why they want to keep on using you. And then you have to find a way to magically make them tell other people about it so that it can grow. But I really believe that only business models that really add value have a chance of survival. There is definitely, and unfortunately, a lot of business models that in the short term will attract a lot of clients because they promise them stuff that they can't deliver. But those will always vanish in the end. Although it's very annoying that sometimes they last for a couple of years. But well, I hope that's a useful answer.
One question from me, coming back to Think ETFs. What was exactly the moment when you thought, okay, I would start my own company? What was the thought?
Well, I vividly remember, even though it's a long time ago. So when I was still a trader, ETFs were starting to, sort of appear in Europe. So the early zeros was when the first ETFs came to Europe. People started using them, but it turned out it was mainly the professionals that were starting using them. And it was probably 2007 when I started to realize that, hey, there's not a lot of people actually using these great products. And I started thinking, why is this? One of the reasons I could think of was, well, there's no local company bringing them to the market, so there was no Dutch ETF issuer. And the other reason was, one of the bigger, or actually most of the ETF companies that were active in the Netherlands at the time, they had their products domiciled in Ireland, which was great for them because they paid less taxes. But it wasn't great for the investor, because as an investor you would lose the ability to reclaim your dividend tax. And that sort of annoyed me, it frustrated me, because if I used, and I'm not going to name names, it's recorded, but there is a certain ETF issuer that has an AEX ETF, and they've had one for many, many years. So even in 2007, they already had one. And it struck me that if I used that ETF, then yes, I would pay a lower fee, because there were also mutual funds that would sort of track the AEX index. So they all returned a lot worse performance than the AEX because costs were too high. This ETF actually got a lot closer, but it still didn't really manage or matched my expectations, because I lost the opportunity to reclaim dividend tax. And to put it into perspective, the average dividend for the AEX index over the last decades is 3.5%. The dividend tax in the Netherlands is 15%, 1.5. So your basically dividend leakage, as I started calling it, is 15% of 3.5%, which is 52.5 basis points, 0.5%. If you look at the cost of the ETF, which is 0.3, so you basically go from 0.3 to 0.8 because they haven't really structured it well enough. So that to me was annoying, and that was the moment where I realized, come on, this has to be, there has to be a better way to do it. And that's basically how I started my company. So it wasn't done because I thought, I'm just going to make a lot of money selling ETFs. It was like, how come nobody's done it properly? Mm-hmm. And that's how I started. And up until today, I almost said the name, the other AEX ETF is still bigger than ours. And it still baffles me. And it probably goes to show that a lot of Dutch investors pay more attention when they buy their next flat screen television than their next investment product. So yeah, maybe some homework for you all. Yeah, if you have AX ETF, when you get home later, please check if it's the right one.
Okay. Coming back to the audience, are there any other questions? Oh, I think I think he was first.
It's a tie.
Okay, I have a sort of different question because obviously there are a lot of young people in the audience. What kind of advice would you give your 20-year-old self with the knowledge you have right now?
Buy Bitcoin. Oh no, it wasn't there when I was 20. No, okay, so that was a joke.
Was it a joke?
You should not buy Bitcoin, or maybe you should. I don't know. Well, not advice. No, I guess the best advice is probably what I said earlier, and I did it in the end. But during that period, I wasn't really sure if it was going to work out. But that was basically stick to your plan. If you have a certain goal, whether it's okay, let's stick to entrepreneurial stuff or career stuff. Don't give up too easily. I see a lot of people these days that, well, when they apply for a job with us, I've actually heard someone say, well, yeah, I don't think the office is nice enough. I'll go elsewhere. I'm like, hey, what the hell? You should be looking at your job and not just about how the office looks. So it's sort of, the idea to me is that if you're really wanting something, you should stick to it a little bit longer and yeah, be persistent in that. That's probably the best advice. Don't listen too much to other people, because a lot of people will have opinions different than your own. And if you listen to all of them, you'll never end up making a true decision. So yes, stick to the plan, listen to yourself, don't be too worried about what other people think.
You also mentioned that you used to do a lot of option trading. Would you also advise your younger self to not do that, or is it something that was important to you because you learned a lot?
Yeah, you should definitely do it. You should definitely lose a lot of money, because when you're younger, it's smaller amounts, and it's money well spent because you'll learn from it. So yeah, do that. Lose money trading options.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. I noticed in your defense ETF, I noticed you have Palantir and you have Thales, but I don't see the big one, Rheinmetall. Why is that?
It's because of depleted uranium and white phosphor. So they have subsidiaries that use that, and therefore they are screened out.
So it's about ethics?
Yep.
Because, you know, this share doubled 4 or 5 times.
I know. And even so, there is another ETF that has Rheinmetall in it. And if you look at the performance over the last 2 years, there's not a big difference.
But nothing to do with Germany?
No, definitely not, because there are German companies in there. But it's the controversial weapons screening that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, obviously it's, well, the good news is, and it's not just because of us, but Rheinmetall has indicated that they are looking into this matter and that they may refrain from the white phosphorus and the depleted uranium in the future. So, and then hopefully they will be able to join the index. But in the end, I don't think our investors have lost any performance because of it. Because if you look at the overall picture, the controversial weapons screening also screened out a couple of companies that actually not did so great. So it's a balance act, and but it's a fair question, and we get it a lot.
But I mean, you stay consistent with your ethics.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is also relating to what I said earlier. I think, yeah, you have to stick to your plan. I think if you make a decision, you have to stick by it and defend it. And if you can't defend it, then probably was the wrong decision. But I'm very comfortable with the decision, and we'll stick by it.
Thank you.
Okay, then last question for this round. There's one guy at the top who's really waving his hand for us to see.
He will come afterwards. Oh.
Probably nothing. I'd say go ahead. No, it's not entirely true. The regulations in Europe are such that you have to obey benchmark regulation. And benchmark regulation states that you have to have an index provider that has the index that you track. And if your index provider copies the index of my index provider, there will be a lawsuit and you will lose.
Okay, last one then.
I am luckily allowed to buy my own ETFs, and I would even state I should be forced to buy my own ETFs, because if I don't buy them, why would you buy them?
Yeah.
So yeah, I pretty much have all of them, and I've since the beginning. So and also this is something where regulation sometimes annoys me a little bit, because if you go into our annual report, you'll be able to find my personal investments, because I have to be transparent about them. And my only luck is that I have a co-director who has also these rules to obey by. So it's a collective transparency, but yeah, well, you can look at it, divide it by 2, and you pretty much know what I'm invested in.
So you mentioned earlier that sometimes it's good to stay in companies that, for example, right now still invest in fossil fuel infrastructure, because then as an investor you also have shareholder power. Do you, as an ETF manager, to what extent do you utilize this power? And does that policy, either in your company or elsewhere in the sector, also change based on the SFDR classification of your ETF?
Great question. Yes, to start with the latter, the SFDR classification definitely means that we are more active or not when it comes to voting. But the voting itself, we basically outsource for a simple reason, and that is with ETFs and passive investing, there's an earlier question on downside. Maybe this is also one of the downsides. Since the ETF is basically a one-size-fits-all, and we don't know our investors, because in order to buy our ETFs, you have to have an account with a broker or a bank, and they know you, but we don't. So it's very hard to get an idea of what our clients would actually want us to vote for. And even if we were able to ask them, we'd probably get very different responses from a very diverse group of people. So it would be very hard to accommodate all. So what we do is we use a proxy voting firm that basically comes up with, and I hate the word, but like an average voting advice, and we follow it. Is that the best solution ever? No. Is it better than not voting? Surely.
Okay, well, I think we can go to the last part, so Nikita will now introduce it.
Yeah, and that is the future of asset management. So, the world is changing all around us. Things are being automated and AI is taking over the world. Bitcoin is at all-time highs. Everything is
not
being
anymore.
Everything is being digitized. In short, this has a huge impact on the future of asset management. Now we'll talk about the future of asset management and what we as students can do if they want to be the next generation of asset managers. So, Martijn, the first question, very simple. How do you use AI?
Well, honest answer. I use it very practical. So I use it, for instance, when I'm stuck, if I'm writing like a column or something and I think, well, this doesn't really sound right. Mm-hmm. Let's ask ChatGPT how we can improve it. Usually what comes out isn't great either, but at least it gives me something to build upon. But when it comes to investing, I don't really use it to basically ask ChatGPT, what's the next big company? What's the next Magnificent Seven company?
Do you think you could use it for that?
No, actually I don't, because as I mentioned earlier, it's difficult enough for people to decide which is the good company, which is the bad company. And I don't think AI is, certainly at the moment, at the level where it could make better decisions. But even if AI improves, if we go back to my Ahold example, when Ahold really hit some bookkeeping scandal, AI would also not have discovered it before it came out. So yeah, I don't really think AI will make a big difference when it comes to investing. on that level, but I do think it could help us, for instance, in discovering companies that are more pure play than others. So I mentioned when we have thematic ETFs, we want to find companies that have a certain amount of revenue, let's say more than 50% from a certain theme. We try to identify those companies by doing research. Our index suppliers, there's a couple of firms we work with, they have people doing the research. But these people nowadays are assisted by AIs to discover companies that otherwise may not have been discovered. So I think there it can help. And it can help in the sense that it can simply do a lot more work in a short period of time than you and I can. So I think that's, for the moment, the big advantage of AI. It's simply like having a spreadsheet and you could do a lot more calculations than before. Well, AI can help you do a lot more desk research than before. For now, I think that's the main benefit. And it's not a magic wand. It will not create the perfect ETF or...
Yeah, so you were talking already a bit about the job itself and how you can use AI for it. You kind of introduced our next question, so that's nice. So AI is able to perform quite some tasks that humans can also do, and it's in some things already better at humans. So how do you think AI will change or replace different jobs within the asset management sector?
Well, I think one of the things it can do really well is read large quantities of text a lot quicker than I can, and also a lot more careful, and then summarize them. So yeah, one of the areas where AI can maybe replace some jobs would be maybe on the legal side or maybe the marketing side. It could be very helpful there. Although I like to think that it will not necessarily replace people. It will probably help people do a better job. And if it helps us on the marketing side, for instance, to get more people interested, then we can probably still keep the people and have them just do more work because of it. So I'm not too worried, and not just for the asset management industry, but for, well, society as a whole. I'm not too worried that this will leave many people out of a job. I think a lot of industrial revolutions have shown that somehow there's always new jobs generated when other jobs are lost. So that's definitely something I expect here as well.
Okay, but what does it exactly mean for the students here, the type of talent you want to hire?
Well, I think first of all, if you aren't already using it to cheat in your exams, I would definitely encourage you to use it to get acquainted with it and to make good use of it to basically enhance what you already are good at. And that's something you can definitely use in your careers later.
Yeah. So, a different topic now, also about the future of asset management. What are your outlooks on the European zone economy and expectations for future development?
Well, I guess over the last 10, 20 years probably, the US has outperformed Europe tremendously when it comes to listed equity or company performance. So we're almost at a stage where you would guess it could not get any worse. So, and I'm also an optimist. I'm an eternal optimist. I think I've said it before. So I think there's definitely some potential in Europe. The thing that we have to do better, though, is we have to become more united, because that whole thing of Europe being one, well, it's still not entirely the case. And looking at sort of the part of our company that I'm managing, the European part, and if I compare it to my US colleagues, I'm always very jealous of my US colleagues, because they have a lot less different regulation to deal with, a lot less languages or cultural differences, and from an economic perspective, Europe and the US are pretty much equals. But doing business in Europe is far, far more difficult because of it, because of the differences. So if we do really want to compete with the US, we probably need to be a little bit more united than we currently are. And one of the things, and the European Committee is actually working on that, is like more a unified capital market in Europe. That would be great, because we have all these different exchanges instead of just one European exchange. And it really makes it more difficult. I think also regulation, we talked about retail investors. There's been for a couple of years now a project within the European Committee on retail participation, on getting more European citizens involved in investing. The AFM, the Dutch regulator, published a paper in 2022 where they basically stated that there's roughly 2 to 3 million people in the Netherlands that have ample savings and that actually should be investing at least part of that, but aren't. And the big question is why. So I think we can definitely do a lot to make Europe more competitive. And yes, we have to change a couple of things, I guess, in order to do that.
But don't you think, for example, more investing into smaller startups for the students, for example, here, that actually produce good value for society, do you think that will help Europe get better?
Yes, in the end, for sure. I think that's definitely something that is also better in the US. There's a lot more capital available for young people trying to start their own business. In Europe, it's less, and there's a couple of reasons, but maybe one of them is if you are successful and if you make a lot of money. In the US, people will actually compliment you for it. Well done, great job, good for you. In the Netherlands, not so much. People are envious. You must have done something very sneaky if you are this rich. You probably, well, so there's a very different mindset. And I guess we need to be more supportive of successful people. We need to be more open to the idea that if someone does something that has added value for society, that he or she is also rewarded for it. And yet that he may or she may drive a nicer car. In the Netherlands, that's still a little bit of an issue.
Yeah.
So let's get rid of that.
All right. So the last question before we move on to only audience questions for the last 10 minutes is I already talked a bit about it in the introduction. So crypto is a much talked about topic nowadays, and it seems like everyone is getting rich off Bitcoin. How do you see crypto's role in asset management in the future?
Well, I think there's definitely a couple of nuances to be made. First of all, Bitcoin is the most known cryptocurrency because it's probably the oldest and has the largest market cap. And I think to a certain extent it has a very interesting case behind it, because if you look at it from this perspective, let's say you live somewhere in Africa or Asia, then you probably do not have access to a bank account, but you probably have access to internet. And by having access to internet, you can have access to Bitcoin and you can transfer value, which is a good thing because it will democratize finance a little bit more than before Bitcoin. So that's one of the use cases for Bitcoin. The other use case is that if you live in Argentina or Turkey or some other country with a lot of inflation, it could make sense to put every month part of your income in Bitcoin in order to protect yourself a little bit against the inflation. So that's another use case, the store of value. Other than that, yeah, Bitcoin is more or less digital gold. It doesn't have a lot of, well, usable value, but it has at least the value that people believe in it. Now, if you look at a lot of the other cryptocurrencies, like Ethereum, Solana, Sui, they are basically platforms for people to build stuff on. People can build apps on it. People can build stuff that other people can use. And then if you think of it from the perspective, what are these guys building? Why is it valuable to society? How big is that demand? How much are people willing to pay for it? Then you can actually start thinking in it in terms of companies. And then you can actually start thinking about crypto coins in terms of equity or shares in that company. And then it starts to make more sense. But then you still have to keep in mind that just like in the zeros, when a lot of companies started to put .com behind their name, sort of indicating that they were very internet savvy, well, some of those companies really didn't do anything with internet and turned out to be, well, rubbish. So the internet bubble burst in 2001 for a reason, because there was a lot of, well, shitcoins, just like we have today. So you really have to be carefully looking at the business case behind these crypto projects, and yeah, then it can definitely make sense. One of the ways it can make sense is, for instance, by creating tokens that in the end maybe could replace shares or even ETFs. Or to rephrase that, you could maybe get shares or ETFs to investors by tokenizing them. Because that way you are probably more efficient and you save cost. So this also is a way to look at it. If something is more efficient and it saves cost, it probably has a right to be there, and someone can make money off it. So yeah, I think that's a couple of words on crypto and blockchain. And yes, I definitely think it's valuable. I definitely think it's an investable asset class, even after today. And I definitely think you should probably consider having at least a part of your portfolio in that asset class. And I think people are usually very binary on-off. I think there's a lot of investors, especially older people, that don't want to have anything to do with crypto, but they probably should own part of it. And there's a lot of younger investors that have mainly Bitcoin and nothing to do with all the other stuff, and they should also probably own part of that. So in the end, investing is all about diversification, because that's a way to mitigate risk. And yeah, I think crypto can play an important part in that.
Yeah, but some projects, of course, they have good value, or well, they have good initiatives for society. But the main problem, me personally, when is it really getting mass adopted? When are we seeing mass adoption?
That's a good question. I think with the internet, people had the same question, end of the 90s. There were a lot of people, even when I was at university, believe it or not, the internet already was there, end of the 90s. And for myself, it was like a fun thing, and you would sometimes go online, and if you were lucky, you could send someone something because he was online too. But obviously, it wasn't really adopted that well. And at the time, I had no idea how massively adopted it would be 20 or 30 years later. I also, when Google started becoming like a listed company, at some point I also thought, how can it possibly become any more valuable than this? Because yeah, it's like a search engine. How much money can you make? Come on. Well, I was wrong. So yeah, I think with crypto, it's probably one of those things that you underestimate what it will mean in the long term. And sometimes people overestimate how quickly it will happen in short term. But I think it will definitely play a part. And yeah, if I'm here 10 years from now, yeah, we can probably discuss it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, for now, the themes of tonight are over. So now we will be moving to some audience questions.
Prove me if I'm wrong, but I saw that VanEck offers no leveraged ETFs. Why is that, or is it maybe also planned?
Low leveraged ETFs?
No, in general, leveraged ETFs. So with a double leverage. Or
Oh, no, we don't. There's a simple reason for it. I hate them. And the reason is, we always tell people you should only invest money that you can afford to lose. Money that you may not need for many, many years. And I don't know why anyone ever thought that it was a good idea to invest money that you don't even have to begin with. But that's what you do with leveraged ETFs or leveraged investing. What happens is, since someone loaned you part of your investment, if your investment goes down, let's say you have a leverage of 2. So you put in 10 euros, someone else loans you 10. So you have 20 euros to invest, and then the market goes down 50%. You end up at 10, then the person who's loaned you the money will say, well, it's getting too risky, I'll take my 10, and you end up with nothing. So your biggest asset, time, is taken away from you if you use leverage on investing. So I think you should never do it, and that's why we don't offer it.
All right, thank you.
All right, next question.
Next question.
Yeah, there are now many of these new products like leveraged ETFs, and there are also many different products.
Do you want to know how I think about leveraged ETFs?
Whatever,
Oh.
yeah. But I also know some chats going around, like maybe there should be an inverse of a specific person who's investing, like Nancy Pelosi or whatever, or Kramer, or there's these chats. Where do you see that ETFs are going to be when in a few years? Like, what will be more normal?
Well, I guess the downside of a popular instrument is that a lot of people will jump on the bandwagon. A lot of people will want to have a piece of the ETF business, and they will think of new innovative ways to abuse the ETF as an instrument. I don't like it. I think even an inverse ETF is not a great idea because it uses optionality that has at least some time value that will decrease. So even with an inverse ETF, time will start to work against you, and time should be your biggest asset. So yeah, I don't really think that innovation in the financial industry is always a good thing. I think sometimes it's really nice to keep things simple, and yeah, that's what I hope, as long as I'm with the company, we will be doing. Because there's so many examples of, let's say, sophisticated financial products that in the end blow up in your face. Yeah, I don't want to be part of that.
Okay.
Next
People
question.
raise their hands. Yes. You will come next, Rosi.
Yeah. So academics is obviously constantly evolving, mainly in, for example, behavioral finance. There's a lot of advancements. How does VanEck keep up with academics and maybe implement it?
Yeah, we visit universities frequently, so I'm hoping at drinks I will get some new insights. But no, in all honesty, we actually have, we're working on a investment app. Actually, it's live, but we're still improving it. And yeah, one of the people that we attracted to work on it is a behavioral scientist in order to help us make use of these insights. And it's a funny question in the sense that I've done my studies here in Enschede, technische bedrijfskunde, so not really hardcore technical studies, but still, I did spend some time in the building that's now the hotel, so technische natuurkunde at the time. So I know a little bit about it, but when I was a lot older, I went in Amsterdam to the UvA to also do psychology for a couple of years, because I was fascinated on the fact that really smart people sometimes made stupid decisions when it came to money. And I wanted to find out why. And this was 2004, 2005, so it was very early days, behavioral finance. As a matter of fact, I think the term wasn't even coined. But there was some research by Daniel Kahneman and Tversky, and yeah, it was fascinating to me. So yeah, we really try to keep up with what's written about it, and I certainly don't think I know everything about it, but it certainly has our interest, and we try to make use of it. And I remember saying to someone, because behavioral finance can be used against you. There's a lot of tricks, nudges that people can do to make you do something that's actually not great for you. And when I started to learn more about it, I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could actually use it to maybe make people do the right thing? So yeah, we do look into it. We try to use it, but it's yeah, well, it's an evolving landscape. And I wasn't kidding, by the way. If anyone has any interesting insights, please do share at drinks.
Thanks.
Okay, Lucy.
So, from this big presentation and up until now what you have said to us, I get the impression that with big capital comes big responsibility and also big pressure to deliver good results to your customers as well. However, when you look at the global economy and one of the major economies, for example, China, USA, and Europe as well, we see a certain form of stagnation, so less growth present in the market and in most of the economies. So, being on the topic of future for asset management in this case is, when is there going to be a time, for example, where we'll have to, how can I say, cut down on the promise of 7% gain per year? or like this good gain that the asset management and ETFs can deliver in this sense?
Well, I would answer that by saying, if you look over the last 10 to 15 years when I was in business, that 7%, we definitely over-delivered. So yeah, maybe in the next 15 years it will be a little bit less. But then over the 30 years, we'd probably still end up with 7. So the 7 is a number that comes up frequently, and it's a long-term average. And long-term averages have a downside. They're usually not applicable to the short term. So if you ask me what will happen in the next 5 to 10 years, I honestly can't tell you. But if you are looking to make an investment now for the next 5 to 10 years, I would probably also tell you to be really, really careful and don't invest everything in equity, because maybe you need a longer horizon to do so. So yeah, that's sort of the inconvenient truth. There is no number I can put on the next 3 to 5 years, or maybe even 10. You have to be able to look at longer periods. And if you look at longer periods, then I am convinced that there is at least no reason to assume that what we've seen over the last 10, 20, or 30 years will not happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years. But just don't look at a too short period of time, because it's basically the inverse, I'm not going to make an ETF out of that, of the weather. The weather gets easier if you predict it in the short term. Long-term weather predictions are rubbish usually. Investing is the other way around. Short term, rubbish. Long term, pretty reasonable.
Okay, I think we can move to the next questions, as we are probably already over time. So we are moving to the last question there behind Max.
Yeah, so regarding the future, disregarding the AI and cryptocurrencies, would you say there's anything else on, let's say, your radar? Would you say that any other developments excite or maybe scare you in the world in terms of technology or anything else?
Wow, so you did save the most difficult question for last, huh? Well, there's not a lot that scares me, other than war, meteorites. There's definitely some things that can have a major negative impact, but I think those are also the things that you should probably not linger on too much, because you will not get very happy from that. Are there any things that I could predict that will have a positive impact? Well, in all honesty, if I knew, we'd probably already have an ETF on it, and we would be encouraging you to buy it. So, no, I think this is one of those questions that I have to be modest about, and yeah, I think it's really hard to answer. I don't really have a good answer for you.
Okay, well, maybe one final burning question with an answer?
This gentleman in the front.
If it's more difficult, I'll just go home.
Yeah.
From who in the industry did you learn the most? Can be 50 years ago, 20 years ago, current, whatever.
Can I name 2 people?
Yeah, of course.
Good. I guess the first one to mention is John Bogle. He's the founder of Vanguard. And he's basically, yeah, the first person who saw, well, maybe not the first person who saw the value of index investing, but at least the first person who actually made it happen. I tend to think that for every good idea that someone turned into a business, there were probably 8 or 9 other people that had the same idea but didn't really see it through. Hence my response to your question. So yeah, definitely someone I look up to, I admire, not just because of, well, what he believed in, but also the way how he, well, ended it up.
Are you going to follow his example of lowering cost?
I will. Well, I've always said lowering cost is a matter of skill. And yes, if I get to the scale that he's at, I will lower my cost. And then the other person I really learned a lot from is one of, well, basically our head of trading at Optiver. When I started, I think I was 25, yes. I learned a couple of lessons, and 2 always stuck in my mind. The first one was, if everybody wants to be on the opposite side of a trade you do, you probably have to rethink the trade, which makes a lot of sense, but it's still good advice. And the other thing was, Once I stop kicking your ass, I don't care anymore, and that's probably not a good sign. So if you ever, and these days obviously we're much woke and bosses will not be kicking your ass literally anymore, but still, if someone puts a lot of effort in explaining you that you do something wrong, it probably means they care and they see potential in you. So that also taught me a good lesson.
Nice, thanks.
Okay, everyone, that was the last question. Next to that, I want to thank Peter from Studium Generale and Dufas, of course, for organizing this. And a special thanks to Martijn Rozemuller, of course. So everyone, give it up.